My 1913 Bradshaw's Handbook to the Chief Cities of the World has brought me to Australia. I will ride some of the longest trains and the world's steepest railway. I'll climb blue mountains and cross red deserts. I'll swim above coral reefs and walk upon golden sands. As I journey across this spectacular continent, I'll discover the gold and silver, coal and wool on which this nation was built. I'll encounter her Indigenous people and her national heroes, and discover the origins of the millions of immigrants who now call themselves Australians. The area of Australia, says Bradshaw's, is 4/5 that of Canada, more than 1/4 the whole British Empire, nearly 3/4 Europe, and more than 25 times the United Kingdom. And yet, Europeans discovered this vast landmass only relatively recently, and underestimating its value, used it as a dumping ground for criminals. Nonetheless, the development of Australia in just 250 years has been phenomenal. Its area also compares with China's, which has a population of 1.4 billion against Australia's 24 million, which leads me to believe that the growth of Australia has scarcely begun. Starting in the oceanside metropolis of Sydney, I'll uncover the stories behind the icons of the city before striking west into the Blue Mountains. I'll then push further into the interior of this vast country and travel 570 miles to the mining city of Broken Hill. Along the way, I'll ride on the world's steepest railway. Looks more like a roller coaster than a train. Get stuck in with the life-saving patrol on Bondi Beach. Heave! And travel in style on the transcontinental Indian Pacific Railway. This is all part of my fantasy of living in another age. Sydney, the capital of New South Wales, is the largest city in Australia and the principal commercial centre of the South Pacific. Its rateable value is greater than that of any other city in the British Empire other than London itself. By the time of my guidebook, the transportation of convicts to Australia had long since ended. Nonetheless, the fact that Sydney was so large, and indeed so elegant, owed a lot to their initial hard labour. Sydney was Britain's first colony in Australia. It was founded in 1788, when Admiral Arthur Phillip settled convicts who'd arrived on the First Fleet at Sydney Cove. The city quickly developed from a precarious penal settlement into a thriving, respectable town, characterised by handsome architecture. Sydney Central Station, and to tell you the truth, I was underwhelmed by the platforms, but this concourse is something different. I love this iron roof and the stonework and the brickwork and the stained glass windows. Oh, and the clocks, which are very, very lovely indeed. Many streets and landmarks in central Sydney bear the names of British monarchs and colonial administrators during the city's early history. The best part of town, says Bradshaw's, consists of 4 or 5 streets running parallel with George Street. George III was the monarch at the time of the Cook expedition and when the first convicts arrived. It is a city of splendid buildings, chiefly built of light brown sandstone. This is the Queen Victoria buildings, which of course bears the architectural mark of her reign. By 1913, when my Bradshaw's guidebook was published, convicts were no longer being transported, and immigrants to Sydney, Australia's largest city, were free settlers. At Circular Quay, I get my first glimpse of the magnificent Sydney Harbour. Bradshaw's tells me it's 14 miles in length and deep enough to hold all the navies of the world. It's a natural marvel, graced by the structures that flank it. To me, this is one of the loveliest combinations on the planet of natural beauty and human artifice. The dark, immovable bridge was copied from one in New York City, but the luminous white opera house was like nothing that anyone had ever seen, and it looks as though it might float or fly away at any moment. And now the bridge has a new architectural feature. Across the top, little moving bumps, people climbing the bridge. It's said that the very best view of Sydney is from the top of what the locals call the coat hanger. So where better to start my visit? I need to take my courage in both hands. I will shortly be attached to the bridge by this. I have the utmost faith in Australian engineering and in you, Tash.
Thank you. You can hook that one up on your left now in that little ring.
On there?
Yeah, perfect.
Natasha Doherty is my guide to the bridge's summit. You've been doing this for a while?
Yeah, I've been here about a year and a half and I love it. I come to work every day and I'm happy to be here. It's incredible.
And you see how complicated Sydney is, all the bays and the harbours. It is a city of water, isn't it?
Yeah, it's incredible harbour traffic as well. The harbour's so busy.
Yes.
I mean, before the harbour bridge, the only way to get from one side of the harbour to the other was by very long train trip or the ferries.
As early as 1815, the idea of a bridge to link the northern to the southern shore of the harbour was mooted, but it was to take over a century to become a reality. A design was agreed upon in 1912, and construction began in 1924. It took 1,400 men 8 years to build, and was pivotal in creating a modern, connected Sydney. And so as we reached the top, we were rewarded with an Aboriginal flag and the flag of the Commonwealth of Australia, with an amazing view of the engineering of this bridge, with a sensational panorama of the city.
Welcome to the summit.
So, how many steps was that?
1,390.
I felt every one of them.
Yeah.
And we have reached a height?
We're 134 metres above sea level.
Which I must say is high enough. Weighing in at more than 50,000 tonnes, Sydney Harbour Bridge is one of the largest steel arch bridges in the world, and the views from the top are immense. I can't resist a photo for the folks back home.
Looking good, Michael. Alrighty, in 3, 2, 1. Perfect, I love that.
The Sydney that I'm looking at today is a very different prospect to the undeveloped wilderness that the first settlers saw nearly 250 years ago, when they arrived by sea into this same harbour. The continent became known, says Bradshaw, about 1770, when Captain Cook explored the east coast and named it New South Wales. For me, travelling 24 hours by plane from Europe to Australia is an adventure, but Cook had been at sea for nearly 2 years when he landed here. He was not the first European to explore this unknown continent, but with his claiming and naming of New South Wales for the British Crown, the white man's epic in Australia began. To uncover the story of those first explorers, I'm off to Darling Harbour to board a replica of Captain Cook's ship Endeavour and to meet Nigel Erskine from the Australian Maritime Museum. Nigel, where did Cook land and how long did he stay?
He actually made land at Botany Bay and he was here for 8 days.
And did he then just leave Australia?
No, he spent several months then tracing his way up the east coast of Australia, and it's thanks to Cook that we finally solved the riddle of, what does the east coast of Australia look like?
When Cook set sail, he took with him secret orders from the British Admiralty to seek a continent or land of great extent and to claim it for Great Britain. He succeeded on both counts and drew up surveys which stood as the main maps of Australia for almost a century. These maps, Nigel, when do they date from?
So these are all copies of the originals made in 1770. This one is of Stingray Bay, or as it was later called Botany Bay, because of all of the wonderful botanical specimens collected in this particular bay. This one is a coastal chart showing Endeavour Reef, where the vessel was wrecked. They're very concerned whether or not they're going to get off. Luckily they did. And then this one's of the Endeavour River. We can see here, this is the camp where the crew lived under canvas when the vessel was being repaired. He spent about 6 weeks here in the Endeavour River, and it's in those 6 weeks that they actually shot a kangaroo, so the first depiction of a kangaroo was made there. And also in those 6 weeks, he struck up a relationship with the Indigenous people here at Endeavour River, and we understand that that ultimately became a very positive relationship.
That first meeting was harmonious.
It was indeed, yes.
Relations with Indigenous people may have started well, but that wasn't to continue. British Prime Minister William Pitt the Younger sent the first convicts to Australia. He had ambitions to expand British commerce throughout East Asia and the Pacific, and Australia offered new opportunities. New South Wales was first settled, says Bradshaw's, in January 1788 as a penal colony. Now, it seems an awfully long way to come to do your porridge, but the fact is that the men and women who helped to tame this hostile territory, many of them were doing time. I'm meeting Scott Cumming from Sydney Living Museums to find out more about the first fleet of settlers. Hello, Scott.
Michael, welcome to the Hyde Park Barracks.
Great to be here. And what does this panorama tell us?
Well, it's a panorama from 1820, and it tells us what Sydney was like in this early colonial period of the convict story.
I'm amazed by how developed it is by 1820, because the convicts only arrived here in 1788. Why was Britain sending convicts to Australia?
There was a backlog of convicts building up in hulks, no longer seaworthy vessels on the Thames, and the convicts couldn't be sent as they had been to the colonies of the Americas because of the War of Independence there. In 1788, when they first arrived here, they were just surrounded by bush. They would have seen the place as wilderness, unrecognisable to these people who come from Britain and Europe.
I take it that this is a somewhat idealised view of Sydney in 1820, but take me through what's going on here.
Well, idealised it is. You can see people getting along. The buildings are all perfectly sorted. There's work going on. There's Indigenous people, Aboriginal people. It's really depicting a sense of order in this city that was probably not the case.
The arrival of settlers led to violent conflict between two contrasting cultures. Indigenous people shared land and resources, whereas the European incomers believed in private property and immediately began to create towns and cities. The convicts then were put to work, what, as slave labour?
I wouldn't call them slave labour. They worked for nothing. They were put to work building the early city, clearing ground. They weren't slaves. They were serving a period of penal servitude. And after their 7-year sentence or their 14-year sentence, they would be free men.
Men and women?
There were convict women, far fewer than the men, and mostly put into domestic service situations, assigned privately.
And how did it happen that you were able to design such beautiful buildings here in early New South Wales?
In a sense, I think it's down to the conviction of a particular felon, Francis Greenway, who was an architect trained in Bristol. He designs lots of buildings around town, and the Hyde Park Barracks is one of his great achievements.
Well, he's impressed me.
These barracks were built by convicts for convicts and commissioned by Sydney's governor to house men and boys. In the curator's office, Scott shows me the museum's prize artifact.
Oh,
An original convict shirt.
that is superb. So what sort of date is that?
1835 to 1848, probably. We can't be certain, but certainly it came out of this building and uncovered during an archaeological investigation in the 1980s.
And what does this artifact tell you about conditions?
It tells us that they were having to mend their clothes, they were having to look after their issue. This is government issue clothing. They were issued 2 of these a year. They were really responsible for maintaining and looking after these clothes and making them last.
Were the convicts able to remain fairly clean?
Well, I would have thought not terribly. They washed once a week on a Saturday. They were required to, and shaved on a Saturday, and they would have washed their shirt. They couldn't have hung it on a line to dry. They would have had to wear it on their back to dry it so that somebody didn't steal it from them.
There was no honour amongst thieves?
If it would seem not, Michael.
Men slept densely packed together in rows of hammocks a yard apart.
Oh,
So, Michael, here's your opportunity for a lay down in one of our Hyde Park Barracks hammocks.
such an extraordinary number in one room.
Well, 70 in this room and 30 in the smaller rooms. 200 a floor over 3 floors, 600 men a night in hammocks.
The hammocks themselves are quite comfortable, but to be so cheek by jowl with hundreds of other people.
Indeed.
And you've got to imagine the stench and the
Well,
noise and
yeah.
the snoring and the crying out and oh dear, awful.
There's no plumbing in the building, so there's buckets around for night soil. It would have been pretty high in here, I would think.
Once the convicts had served their time, and if they'd behaved well, they were given a ticket of leave, which meant they could begin making a life for themselves.
People who probably would have found it very difficult or have so few opportunities back in Britain at this time found that after their sentence had expired and they'd done their time, they opened businesses here. They encouraged family to join them here. Eventually, this became a place of significant opportunity. Every convict becomes a free man eventually, even lifers.
So I think, as many a convict must have said before me, I'd rather be suspended in Australia than hanged in England.
By the time my Bradshaws was published, the population of Sydney had reached 700,000. The city sprawled into surrounding areas, and the suburbs were created.
One of the things that surprised me is how early in its existence Sydney became sophisticated. I mean, look at this beautiful street. This is no hick colonial architecture. There's real style here and real craftsmanship in this lacy ironwork. And today, these Victorian villas are being renovated, helping to make Sydney impossibly chic.
The city's also home to some of the most creative cuisine in the world. I'm looking forward to sampling its famous fusion food. The idea is to combine different culinary flavours and traditions in a single dish. Sydney's multicultural population and its openness to influences from Asia have led its chefs to blend diverse styles of cooking.
Tastes the pork and squid ink sausage. That is really nice. That's lovely. Happily, East and West have met in my food bowl.
up with the lark and heading to the eastern edge of the city. I'm bound for one of Sydney's 100-plus beaches along the Pacific coastline.
Bondi, one of the most famous beach names in the world, also has a railway junction.
The kilometre-long, sweeping white sand crescent of Bondi Beach is a picture postcard location. Its reliably big waves make it a magnet for surfers.
Bondi Beach is the home of the Body Beautiful, where people come to worship the sea, the surf, and I would say the self. But the power of the tides and of the waves is greater than any ego. And some people volunteer selflessly to keep the waters safe.
I'm here to meet one such volunteer, Cyril Baldock, who's a lifetime member of the Bondi Surf Bathers Life-Saving Club.
So, Michael, here's the famous Bondi Beach.
Yes, what a magnificent stretch of sand it is. I noticed that your club was founded in 1907. I'm just wondering, how long before that did bathing at Bondi become respectable?
The Waverley Council didn't allow swimming or bathing during daylight hours until 1905.
How extraordinary. And did they seek to separate the genders?
No, that wasn't necessary because both genders wore pretty well neck-to-knee costumes in those days, both male and female.
How long does it take for the surf culture to develop here at Bondi?
It didn't take very long. During 1906, a few young locals decided that a lot of people were getting into danger and they needed to do something to help that out. So that's when they got together and formed this club. And the surf culture just built from there because once it was safe to bathe, they came from everywhere.
The Bondi Surf Bathers Life-Saving Club was the first in Australia. 31 years after it was established, the club hit the national headlines when tragedy struck.
Exactly 80 years ago, in February in 1938, and it's still known as Black Sunday, over 200 people got swept out to sea.
200 people swept out, you mean killed?
No, 5 drowned. We saved 195 out of 200.
Wow. And how many volunteers are there rescuing?
We've got around about 350 at the moment.
That's an army.
Yeah.
So as we look out now, are the club rescuers on duty today?
Yes, they are. You'll see down here the tent where they're based.
The lifesavers were on duty during the summer months of October to April. To do my bit, I head down to the shore to join Dorrie Miller and the crew.
Hello, Dorrie. I'm Michael.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Good to see you. What does this sea look like on a day when you're worried about the safety of bathers?
There would be big waves, sometimes massive waves, and rips. Rips are our most dangerous thing to look out for on the beach.
But on such a day when there are big waves, those are days when people are out.
Sometimes, yes, but on calm days like this, it can also be very dangerous and people have a sense of security and they don't actually know that they're in danger.
So you're vigilant all the time?
All the time.
And this venerable piece of equipment here, what is that?
So this is a surf reel. It's the original rescue device. It was invented by a Bondi Club member in 1907 and probably used up until the 80s. We have this belt. The rescuer would put the belt on, swim out, pick up the patient, and they would be hauled back to the beach.
That sounds pretty effective to me. Obviously, you need a team to do it.
You need a team. It is effective, but it's exhausting.
Oh, I was about to volunteer.
I opt to stay safely on dry land as we try out the surf reel during a practice rescue.
Okay, Michael,
What do we do? What do we do?
Middle,
In the middle.
pick up the line, run down.
Running to the beach.
We reel out 400 metres of cotton line.
Which is going very fast. Yes, she's made contact. Okay, now we have to reverse the process.
Yep.
Heave. Heave. Ah, looking good.
Drop the line.
Drop the line.
Come down.
Okay. And I get the head.
Yep.
And I pull the head up. So
All right. Up the beach.
And we're running up the beach. Quick pins. And around
Face the ocean.
we go.
All right.
And down we go with the patient. Can she sit up? Ah. How are you feeling?
Oh, awful.
But she's made it. She's made it.
21st century life-saving technology has moved on considerably. Belinda Hartman is a volunteer lifesaver.
Hello, Michael.
Good to see you.
Yes, great to have you on Bondi Beach.
Today, what do you do?
Well, today this is the evolution of life-saving. Super fast boats. We can get out behind the waves in about 15 or 20 seconds. We can cut across the bay in about a minute. We can get a patient to shore in less than a minute.
You want to show me how it works?
Certainly, absolutely.
At your orders.
All right, let's go.
What do I do?
Grab the legs when they come in, Michael.
Here come the legs of my
The club still performs some 300 rescues a year. Thanks to its brave members, the 35,000 visitors each day to Bondi can swim and surf in safety.
Hello, do you mind if I just stop you guys a second?
Yeah, sure.
I don't live in a city with a beach. Is it absolutely an essential part of your life to have a city with a beach?
Oh, most definitely.
Yeah, I totally, wholeheartedly agree.
Yeah. We were swimming there today and it's just like, oh, my soul needs this.
I'm back in central Sydney. And before I embark on my journey into the vast interior of Australia, I must explore the building that has done so much to put this city on the global map, its Opera House. I may have saved the best till last.
Its architect intended these steps to lead us from the ordinary life to an exceptional life. And certainly his building has taken Australia to a higher plane.
I'm meeting up with Bruce Barnett for a guided tour.
Bruce,
Michael,
great to see you.
great pleasure to welcome you here.
What a view. I'm just thinking that few architects in history could have had an opportunity like this to build on this site.
These architects from all around the world had a competition, and then this man from Denmark, Johan Utzon, quite young, 38, on the other side of the world, doesn't know Sydney, designs this, he wins the competition, and it's a blank canvas, virtually. An extraordinary location.
The judges felt that Utzon's design had the potential to become one of the world's most important buildings, whilst remaining sympathetic to its surroundings, with the sail-shaped roof echoing those of passing vessels in Sydney Harbour.
I can't tear myself away from the view, but on the other hand, I have to see the concert hall.
Totally. Let's go inside and have a look.
Thanks.
The Opera House has 2 main concert halls and 4 smaller spaces for more intimate performances.
Oh, Bruce, absolutely stunning. But I've been in the Opera House before, but never in this auditorium. What is this?
Well, this is called the concert hall. This is the biggest theatre for the big concerts, orchestras, pop, rock.
The creation of this great building was far from plain sailing. Utzon's design was an ambitious feat of engineering. The complicated roof led to costly delays, and Utzon was criticised heavily by the Australian government of the day.
He was forced to resign in 1966. We had a change of government, a lot of controversy. It's going way over time and over budget. So then this sits empty for a while before the interior is then designed.
But Wouldn't you say there are certain buildings, I mean, you know, maybe starting with the pyramids, that eventually, when they're finished, you don't quibble about the cost. You don't quibble about how long they took. They're just magnificent.
I'm quite certain that the day it opened, all those people who were the naysayers for years suddenly said, well, I always thought it was going to be wonderful. And of course, it was described as the building of the 20th century. It is a world icon. Apparently, the most recognised building in the world. Sydney Siders are very proud of this place. The building that changed the image of a nation is something we say about it, and it did. It wasn't just about meat pies, football and beer and surfing. It was suddenly, oh, you've got culture as well.
Utzon didn't attend the opening of the Opera House in 1973. But his vision and genius endure in Sydney Harbour for the world to admire. My time in Sydney is up, but the excitement is far from over. I'm leaving the city behind and heading west into the Blue Mountains.
Doors closing. Please stand clear.
I'm leaving Sydney for the delightfully named Katoomba, which Bradshaw's tells me is the chief station for the well-known Blue Mountains resorts. The gorges and waterfalls of the Blue Mountains, at an elevation of over 3,000 feet, are 60 miles west of the metropolis and provide a complete change of climate and scenery at the cost of a couple of hours train journey. Well, it still takes 2 hours today, and it's costing me less than $7. So it seems to me that both the speed and the price have been frozen in time.
The Blue Mountains are an imposing presence. They cover an area of 4,440 square miles, and the highest peak measures 4,000 feet. Up until 1813, the Blue Mountains presented an impassable frontier to early settlers in New South Wales. They were intrigued as to what lay behind the range, but no explorers had succeeded in crossing it. To learn about the first expeditions, I'm meeting up with Education Ranger Jamie Saljevich.
I mean, really, Jamie, just look at that. Isn't it amazing?
It truly is world class.
Now, my guidebook, which is dated 1913, tells me that after the first settlement of New South Wales, every explorer of the interior of the country had failed to cross the Blue Mountains, down to 1813. But then Wentworth, Lawson and Blaxland succeeded. What's that about?
So that was Gregory Blaxland, William Lawson, William Wentworth. Quite well-to-do guys. They had put together a huge expedition, and they did one thing that the rest of the explorers never did. They followed the ridge tops and made it across the mountains. Not trying to go in a straight line like some of the older explorers, the failed explorers. We even had one guy try and make it up this valley. His mission was to get to Round Mountain in the distance. And he went down a valley, up a valley, down a valley, up the valley, down the valley, up the valley, and they just got steeper and bigger, and he didn't even make it close.
The three explorers' 58-mile route took 21 days to complete and established a trail through the mountain range for other settlers to follow.
So Lawson, Blaxland and Wentworth were the first three Europeans to cross the Blue Mountains, were they?
They weren't, actually. There was one explorer, my favourite explorer, Joe Wilson. He's made it across to the mountains. He did one thing that the other explorers didn't do. He went and lived with the Aboriginals. He actually went and joined a tribe. When he returned, he came back with some scars, so he'd been initiated. Being an ex-convict, no one believed his stories because of his status in society.
So you are putting the record straight, and you're telling me that my guidebook is wrong and that Wilson was the first.
Wilson was the first.
Why were these European settlers so keen to get beyond the Blue Mountains?
So Australia is almost 4,000 kilometres east to west. From the east, in Sydney, in 30 years, they'd only ever made it 50 kilometres from the coastline. They actually needed to see what was in the interior. Running out of room quite fast in Sydney, and being sandstone country, it's not good farming country.
Did they succeed in that? Did they find pasture? Did they find land where they could grow crops?
My word, they did. As soon as you cross the Blue Mountains, you're into farmland, and that continues for hundreds and hundreds of kilometres of farmland.
Crossing the Blue Mountains opened up the interior of Australia to European colonists. But this territory had been inhabited and worked for millennia by Aboriginal people. So when settlers encroached, hostilities between the two communities broke out, and there was bloodshed. To help me understand the Indigenous people's relationship with this area, I'm meeting up with Yamandera, a National Parks ranger. Yamandera, what kind of Indigenous peoples lived here in the Blue Mountains?
Many different types of Indigenous peoples. The local people, the Darug people, the Gundungurra from the lower valleys, and up to 6 different language groups, but many, many different clans within them language groups.
What sort of life did they lead in the Blue Mountains?
I think a beautiful, splendid life, a life of sustainability, a life of living at one with the environment, living at one with each other also.
Presumably, of course, the Blue Mountains represented no kind of barrier to the Indigenous people. We think about the European explorers having to overcome these mountains. But for the Indigenous people, they were a natural living environment.
Good point, Michael. My people and the local Indigenous people, they have a connection, always had a connection to this mountains, and they maintain that connection.
That attachment to the country which sustains them remains fundamental to the Indigenous cultures who live in the Blue Mountains today.
Right down here, we've got some of the oldest paint in the world, brother. This is the old ochre. Comes from the country, the local country. So the purpose of this is to connect you with that country. Thank you, my brother.
Thank you. I'm very, very honoured.
The big difference between Western culture and my Indigenous culture, we don't believe we don't sit on top of the country or top of the food chain. We believe we are part of it.
Do you mind if I add one more factor to the ceremony?
Please do, brother.
I'd like to stand for a moment and just appreciate the country as well.
Thank you.
Isn't it astonishing?
Nawa. That's Aboriginal for yes.
As the settlers' incursion into the Blue Mountains gathered momentum, they began to exploit the land for its fuel sources. I'm heading back to Katoomba for a trip on what was once a coal train.
This railway was built by a colliery, but even in those old days before the Second World War, the owners used to charge people sixpence for a ride. Why would they want to do that? Well, because it is the steepest railway in the world, and it has the most amazing views.
The railway was built in the 1880s to transport coal and kerosene shale mined in the depths of the Jameson Valley to the escarpment above. In the 1920s, businessmen realised its potential as a tourist attraction and fitted seats in some of the coal trucks so that it could be used for sightseers at weekends. Nowadays, it's purely for thrill seekers. And reassuringly, the carriages have been upgraded.
In front of me, a sort of gauze or mosquito net, and ahead, what looks more like a roller coaster than a train. and down we go. Reaching 52 degrees of angle or 128%. Getting steeper again. A breathtaking run, but the whole thing lasts 125 seconds. Well, I have no doubt that the claim to be the world's steepest railway is absolutely right.
I've returned to Sydney Central Station to embark on the final leg of this journey. I'm heading west, deep into Australia's interior.
The 1502 to Perth is a train that hides its light under a bushel. This is the famous Indian Pacific. And to Perth, it's more than 4,000 kilometres. It's just the fourth stop. That means every stop is more than 1,000 kilometres apart. I'm headed to Broken Hill, to the outback.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Indian Pacific is over for Brook. As I mentioned, so on platform number 1, we have carriages A all the way up to carriage A, and here on platform number 3, carriages L to O.
A long journey warrants a long train. The Indian Pacific is an incredible 711 metres long.
Thank you.
So it has to be split in half to fit onto the platforms, and then joined up on departure.
Oh, thank you. My word, this is absolutely huge. Look at the size of this bed. I don't know where to sit. Do I sit here? Do I sit there? So what do I have here?
We've just popped your luggage in here already for you.
Oh, thank you.
And we've just popped your book down here for you.
Very important part of my journey, that is.
This just through here is your ensuite.
Well, I think I'm going to like this train. Good enough to hang my hat. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome aboard the Indian Pacific. My name is Deb Munn and I'm your train manager on our journey through to Adelaide tomorrow afternoon. We hope you enjoy the time you have on board with us. If you have any questions throughout the journey, please don't hesitate to ask me or any of our friendly attendants.
May I come in?
Of course you may. Welcome.
So, this is an extraordinary journey, isn't it? And you must see a lot of people excited by making that journey.
I certainly do. A lot have saved a long time to come and travel on our train and travel across the continent.
What is it that people find special about this train?
I think it's the romance of train travel. To travel across a continent is something really special. I don't think there's any better way to see a country than by train.
Passengers travelling all the way from Sydney to Perth will be aboard for 4 days. My journey to Broken Hill is a mere 15 hours, so I think I'll make the most of it and relax with my fellow passengers.
Would you mind if I join you a moment?
Yes.
Well, first of all, cheers, everybody.
Cheers.
Isn't this amazing?
Yes, enjoy the journey.
Are you enjoying it?
Absolutely.
Where are you going? Perth. Perth. All going to Perth?
All the way, yeah.
Heavens. What made you think of this journey?
Just something different instead of flying.
And you've never done this trip before?
We did it many years ago, but we did it on the cheap and we sat up all the way. We didn't have a carriage.
We get to lie down in a bed tonight.
Now, where are you from?
We're from the UK.
Holiday, you're not resident in Australia?
No, we're holidaying.
What made you take the Indian Pacific?
My husband's always wanted to do the train journey. We haven't been to Australia for 25 years and we wanted to do something a bit different.
Is it living up to your expectations at the moment?
So far.
Very enjoyable. How far are you going?
We're only going to Adelaide.
Well, only 24 hours.
Yes.
Yeah. And have you done great railway adventures before yourself?
No, never. Unless you count the London Underground trying to get to work in the morning.
Let's hope this is even more scenic.
Yes.
Before 1970, passengers travelling from Sydney to Perth would have had to change trains 5 or 6 times because the rail gauges were different across the continent. Now they've been standardised and the journey can be completed on one train.
Wow, the dining room is absolutely exquisite. This is all part of my fantasy of living in another age. Bon appetit, everybody.
Thank you. Bon appetit.
This is one of my favourite moments. The evening, the long shadows, the vastness of the continent, a train moving gently across it, and a jolly good steak. Well, after that splendid dinner, I'm sure I'm going to sleep very well. I find that nothing induces sleep quite as much as a little reading of Bradshaw. Bye-bye, Deb. Safe journey.
Thanks, Michael. Enjoy Broken Hill.
Thank you.
After a 570-mile journey through the night, I've arrived at my destination deep in the parched outback. As European settlers pushed further into the interior, they discovered Australia's rich mineral deposits. Broken Hill's mining wealth put this isolated outpost on the international map. Margot White was born and bred in Broken Hill.
How did Broken Hill start?
Broken Hill started in 1883 with the discovery of minerals. They weren't quite sure what it was, but a German immigrant from Stuttgart had a bit of knowledge of science, so he saw this very, very dark black hill and it intrigued him, so he thought, I'll investigate that. And the analysis was it was a very high grade of silver.
Was there then a silver rush?
No, not really, because of our isolation. 700 miles from Sydney, 300 from Adelaide, no roads. So in 1883 they started mining. Then finally, after about 2 years of digging a lot of dirt, the discovery was really made.
The town must have grown pretty quickly because my 1913 guidebook tells me that it's a town of 31,000 people.
That's correct. It was, shortly after that it increased to 35,000.
Do you come from a mining family?
I certainly do, both sides. My father's parents came here in about 1890, so I'm third generation and I have 2 generations below me, so there's 5 generations in Broken Hill.
What stories did you hear about the mining from your family?
Oh, lots of stories from my dad. He was an underground timberman. He always had stories to tell. a lot of stories about mateship, friendships of the men that they worked with, because there was a bond of trust that they looked after each other if ever there was an incident underground. But he was lucky. He escaped any serious injury and had a healthy set of lungs and died at the age of 87, so he had a good life.
Does Broken Hill still depend on mining?
Yes, it certainly does. It's the only real industry here.
To get an idea of a miner's life in the days of Margot's grandfather, I'm taking a short drive to the Daydream mine at Silverton to meet guide Jason White.
Jason, I'm Michael.
Hello, mate.
Good to see you. So, Daydream Mine, when was that set up?
First discovered in 1881, and the bloke who actually found it was a bloke called Joe Meach, who was a prospector who used to walk through here. And a number of months later, they formed the Barrier Range Silver Mining Association, and then it would become a mine in September 1884.
Did it do well as a mine?
In the first year of profit, it profited £100,000.
£100,000 worth of profit?
That was just taking expenditures out of it as well, so it was quite a lot of money in them days.
So they were doing pretty well.
Silver mining gave a much-needed boost to the region's economy and has dominated Broken Hill ever since.
It's a relief we can stand up straight.
One place you can.
So what form did the silver come in?
Basically come in a seam, which is where you can see all the packed stone walls over in through the mine.
Yes.
That's where the silver was. They've come through, mined all that out.
And how pure is that silver?
Up to 18,000 ounces of silver per tonne.
Is that pure?
To give you an idea, that Broken Hill now currently runs up to 2 to 4 ounces a tonne.
Wow, so it was incredibly pure.
So basically all you'd have is one bloke holding onto a chisel, two blokes, one on each side with a sledgehammer each. And
I'm doing that.
Yep.
And then the other fellow's doing that.
Following it through. So as you can imagine, if you've got your hands there, how easy it was to lose multiple fingers and hands.
Grim. What were conditions like then for men working down here?
Basically, let's just say an old bloke was 30, 35 years. They used to say within 2.5 years of a shaft sinker, which was the bloke sinking the vertical holes, they were mostly coughing blood by that stage.
Because of what?
Mostly the mica, which is all the sparkle you see throughout the ceilings of the walls. It's like asbestos. It gets in your lungs and just cuts them to pieces.
How do they treat it?
Only the workers of the company were given opium. The contractors weren't given opium. Other than that, they used to say drink large sums of whiskey.
What did the opium do to you?
Basically relax the lungs so that the lung wasn't trying to fit and cough the blood out of it.
And so you could?
You work longer.
Many deaths resulted from the poor conditions in Broken Hill. Miners fought for change, and bitter and protracted strikes occurred during the early 20th century. The struggles led to improved health and safety for miners, and for the first time in Australia, a 35-hour working week. Broken Hill was famed as a bastion of trade unionism. The city has created a memorial to the miners who lost their lives.
High up on a slag heap and dominating Broken Hill is this impressive monument to more than 800 miners who died at work, electrocuted, run over, killed by a rockfall. If the history of mining here had a silver lining, it certainly also had a black cloud.
While Broken Hill's primary industry is still mining, the city looks to the future and to exploiting another natural resource. The next phase of industrial growth here will come from harnessing the sun's rays. I've arranged to meet project manager Adam Mackett.
Adam, statement of the obvious, it is sunny here, but how sunny is it?
To give you a bit of an idea, there's only 250 mils of rain in Broken Hill. So it's days like this, glorious days all the time.
So this is sunny even by Australian standards?
From world standards, this is an exceptional site, and so that's why we've picked this location.
What kind of area have you got here?
It's 140 hectares.
Help me to understand what 140 hectares is like.
The size is about 75 times the Sydney cricket ground, so it's an amazing bit of infrastructure.
Where does this go to?
Effectively, the Broken Hill solar plant is powering Broken Hill. So we produce enough power for over 20,000 homes, and that's our average energy use for the whole year. So it's a lot of generation, 126,000 megawatt hours. And that power is not only used by the homes in Broken Hill, but also by the industry.
This needed subsidy, and some consumers have complained about the prices they're paying. I mean, firstly, is that fair? And secondly, will it change with time?
I think the Broken Hill Solar project was one of the first large-scale projects in Australia. So I think what we will see, and it's my kids will start to benefit from this, is that due to the low maintenance costs, you know, the fuel's for free, the maintenance is very low, that'll be the real benefit in the time of these type of technology.
Do you think your children then will look at this and say, goodness, that was tiny?
Absolutely. I think in years to come, this type of technology will get used a lot more widely, especially in a place like Australia. We've got a lot of sun, we've got a lot of land, so I would expect to see a lot more, and we already are.
This heat-scorched, isolated outback city must live from exploiting natural resources, in the future as in the past.
Here, near Broken Hill, Australia began to grow rich. From what had seemed an unpromising start, a penal colony at Sydney, New South Wales colonists had pushed through the Blue Mountains to uncover the mineral wealth that was buried here. In the process, the Aboriginal population suffered a momentous decline. Modern-day Australians acknowledge that tragedy and remember that long before the arrival of the Europeans' first fleet, these lands have been cared for by Indigenous people.
Next time, I'll marvel at the nation's riches.
What would they be worth, do you think?
Probably just shy of $2 million sitting right in front of us.
Traverse the desert in style.
Explorers perished crossing this plain. Today it's a little easier.
And take a gamble in the outback.
Tomorrow at 9, Simon Reeve joins the US Border Patrol in Texas and travels through the Mexican city under sway of a drugs cartel. We're next in the Americas. And next tonight here on BBC Two, Sandy Toksvig, Alan Davis, Josh Widdicombe, Holly Walsh and Cariad Lloyd make it a quintessential QIXL.